This is Tom Doody, middle-aged American living in New Jersey near the Lincoln Tunnel. If you were to visit my website, you would type Howdy Doody. Google. You'll find the correct spelling of the famous puppet. Then combine Tom Doody in a Google search for my site. Friday afternoon, before rush hour. It's not quite rushed enough by choice. It's early rush hour. It's Times Square, NYC subterranean Times Square. Shuttle train. There's a track 1, a track 3, and a track 4. And only 1 and 3 are running. So 1, 3, and 4 kick in and peak rush. And there's a place just not only gets high volume foot traffic, but also high speed foot traffic. It's a bottleneck. Nice little place where I get a protected spot right in the bottleneck. In fact, the spot that I'm protected with the steel beam is part of what makes it a bottleneck. So I will try to hit that again. I have yet to hit that. I've tried on a couple of occasions. Last night it was too late. Tonight too early. So Friday night, Slow TV. Slow TV is credited to NRK. Listeners, if you want to spend a minute, type in Slow TV and you'll be directed to a lot of information about what they've done in Norway with Slow TV. It's remarkable. It's an invention that if the professionals, the media, broadcasting pros in Norway did not think of it, it could be that no one would ever think of it. Unlike the telephone, someone was going to come up with it. But Slow TV may have gone undetected. And I'm having some fun with it, and my click history reports are telling me that I've got readers, listeners, watchers that seem to be saying keep going. I read 2 reports from the news, both on FIFA. Since the most recent time that I read, which is just before this, the news since I read includes basically 2 people. This is a repeat occurrence when a ring of criminals gets arrested together. They begin to make newsworthy. Their activities begin to be newsworthy, and some of them the reverse happens. They manage to get themselves out of the news. Sometimes by going straight to jail. Bernie Madoff is a great example. And others just make a fuss in the press. So today's news includes Chuck Blazer, which is one story in the New York Times. And the second story is a Trinidad man. He is of African descent. He's a Trinidad native. People in the island of Trinidad, of course, it's a multicultural island, but the majority of them either look like they're from India or they look like they're from Africa. This fellow looks like he's from Africa or descended from people of Africa. So he is an executive who's been arrested. He was not arrested in Switzerland, and he has since gone on TV in his home country of Trinidad. He was arrested and let go on bail in Trinidad. And he has since gone on TV professed his innocence, of course, and also essentially validated the charges by condemning his co-conspirators. So it's his name is Warner, Mr. Warner. I think they'd have a first name for him. I think it's Jack Warner. Can't believe it. They call him Mr. Warner all the way through this. Oh, that's because it's an editorial. I'm confused because I thought this was a news report. Come to understand that when I get there. So from the New York Times, slow TV. I begin with Chuck Blazer. Chuck Blazer, he is an American, and he is one of the ones arrested 2 years ago. He pleaded guilty. They sealed his guilty plea. The United States Justice Department sealed his guilty plea. And so nobody knew he had been arrested. Nobody knew he had been charged and pleaded guilty. And he continued to cooperate with the investigation for 2 years, doing things like wearing a mic and assisting in the collection of incriminating evidence against some of the people who were arrested in Zurich. And his collection of testimony is now been released. So this was the big bust in Switzerland that got like 8 of these guys. Then a couple of days passed, or a week or so passed, and now we have a release to the press, release to the public, was a lot of documents that explain specifically what Chuck Blazer was able to contribute to convicting evidence against his fellow amigos. So here we go. New York Times, June 3rd. Chuck Blazer left with Sepp Blatter in 2005. Mr. Blazer, who is a FIFA executive committee, pleaded guilty in a corruption case. And in Brooklyn, where it was brisk, dry, Monday, Chuck Blazer entered courtroom 10A South in a wheelchair after a judge ordered the doors locked and the hallway clear of lurkers. Mr. Blazer admitted that he had taken bribes from bidders seeking to host the 1998 and 2010 World Cups, and he had uttered the plea that would help lead to corruption charges against top officials in FIFA. So that was among other things. I agreed with other persons in or around 1992 to facilitate the acceptance of a bribe in conjunction with the selection of a host nation for 1998 World Cup. Mr. Blazer told Judge Ramon Doody when he entered his plea in 2013 in the United States District Court in Brooklyn. This is a Tom Doody editorial, middle-aged American editorial. So this man pleaded guilty 2013. He's been collecting evidence for 2 years, wearing mics, generating conclusive evidence. We'll see if it's conclusive, but generating evidence against these people. The story breaks. A bunch of people get arrested, and what do you know? Vladimir Putin, President Putin of Russia, decides to immediately discredit the arrests made by the United States, saying that they were politically motivated. It is absolutely loud and clear. These arrests are substantial, and if someone is going to jail, on this. I just can't imagine everyone would stay out of jail. Chuck Blazer's probably one of them if he doesn't die first. His health is bad. End of editorial. Other papers filed in the case said Morocco's bid committee had bribed Mr. Blazer. The 1998 tournament was eventually awarded to France. Mr. Blazer also said I and others on the FIFA Executive Committee agreed to accept bribes in conjunction with the selection of South Africa as a host nation for 2010 World Cup, and that he and others agreed to accept bribes and kickbacks in conjunction with the broadcast rights to several Gold Cup tournaments in regional championship in which the United States competes. Facing up to 20 years in prison, Mr. Blazer became a cooperating witness, law enforcement officials said. Although in the redacted version of the plea hearing filed Wednesday, there was no reference to Mr. Blazer cooperating with the government. However, law enforcement officials said that part of Mr. Blazer's cooperation deal had included secretly recording conversations. Eric Congold, a lawyer for Mr. Blazer, declined to comment. There are at least two other cooperating witnesses in the FIFA case that suggest the kind of agreement Mr. Blazer may have struck. They are Darian and Daryl Warner, sons of Jack Warner. Comment from me, Tom Doody. Jack Warner is the subject of my next New York Times article, which is also fresh. These are the sons of Jack Warner, who were also arrested and cooperated with the investigation. They're from Trinidad and Tobago, like their father. And the former president of CONCACAF, soccer governing body overseeing North America, Central America, and the Caribbean. Mr. Blazer, a friend of Mr. Warner's, was CONCACAF's general secretary from 1990 to 2011, and both were members of FIFA's governing executive committee for years. The committee's functions included awarding the hosting rights for the quadrennial World Cup. When each of Warner's sons secretly pleaded guilty in 2013, a judge outlined their cooperation agreements with the government. They agreed to participate in undercover activities, hand over documents, regularly meet with prosecutors, testify when requested, and not divulge their cooperation to anyone without the express permission of prosecutors. Now that anyone would seem to include their dad, who has been arrested recently. That's a tough call to keep that secret from your father. In return, prosecutors said they would file a letter at sentencing noting each defendant's cooperation and asking for a departure from sentencing guidelines. Prosecutors often suggested little or no prison time in return for cooperation. For Darian Warner, prosecutors also say they would suggest to receive an S visa or an informant green card. Mr. Blazer, 70, is now in a hospital. In fact, that complicates prosecution case if he's indeed a central witness. A heavy man, bushy white beard, and misbehaving gray curls, Mr. Blazer cut a colorful figure in the world of soccer. He maintained a blog that chronicled his travels, and photos show him clutching giant beer mugs, raising champagne glasses, and generally looking as if he's having a grand time. Sometimes he wore a shirt covered with images of Donald Duck, and sometimes he went for a more muted, shiny shellac. Here he is with his arm around, it's a photo quote, I don't have the photo. He's with Dr. Ruth, the sex therapist. Another with Miss Universe. and also Nelson Mandela. Those, I trust, are not the same pictures. We don't have Dr. Ruth, Ms. Universe, and Nelson Mandela in the same photo. Now, that would be a photo, but I don't think that happened. While he was soccer executive, prosecutors in Eastern District in New York said his case unsealed last week. He took bribes, including $750,000 to support South Africa as the 2010 World Cup host, also in exchange for broadcast and marketing rights to CONCACAF's Golden Cup tournament. Among other things, according to court papers, the Morocco bid committee offered someone identified as co-conspirator number one, whose biographical details match Jack Warner's, $1 million for his vote for the 2010 World Cup when he and Mr. Blazer were visiting that country before South Africa stepped in with a higher offer. Mr. Blazer also accepts a bribe in the bidding for 1998 World Cup when he traveled to Morocco in 1992 with Mr. Warner, a member of Morocco's bid committee, offering a payment to the co-conspirator, which Mr. Blazer helped facilitate in exchange for his vote. Middle-aged American editorial here, or a side note. So this is evidence that Blazer has traveled with Warner, and this whole story is on the recent evidence that's been released to the public about what Mr. Blazer provided. Well, it seems very clearly here that Mr. Warner is there's evidence pointing to his guilt. In this case specifically with Morocco. So in a moment, I'm going to get to Jack Warner's story in the New York Times that is his pledge of innocence. CONCACAF had separately found that Mr. Blazer had committed fraud, according to a 2013 report. Mr. Blazer used CONCACAF funds for personal purchases, 48,554 Hummer H2 apartments in Mondrian in Miami, part of his rent at the Trump Tower in Manhattan, and down payments on apartments at the Atlantis Paradise Island Resort. The report concluded that he violated CONCACAF's ethic rules and committed fraud against the committee, and he had not filed United States income tax returns. And this man, I think, is the one American. This man is an American, and I think he's the only one, the only American who's been arrested so far. And he's living this extravagant life with travel and apartments, and the man's not filing income tax. But I have read that that's what got this whole thing started about a decade ago. Given Mr. Blazer's bad health, as of last week, he was having trouble speaking. Prosecutors may have challenged using his testimony against other defendants if Mr. Blazer cannot testify at trial. A deposition is one option, said Daniel C. Richmond, a professor at Columbia Law School. While courts do not favor them in federal criminal cases, Mr. Richmond said they are allowed in extraordinary circumstances, and it sounds like this is one. However, defendants and their lawyers must be offered a chance to go to the deposition and cross-examine the witnesses, making it logistically complicated, given the several of the defendants in the FIFA case have not yet been extradited. With some still at large, defendants must also be given discovery material and witness statements before the deposition. Also, if other defendants are added to the case, after a deposition, those defendants will definitionally not be given an opportunity, Mr. Richmond said, so the witness testimony cannot be used against the new defendants. Prosecutors have said that this is only the beginning of the case and that law enforcement sources have confirmed that Mr. Blatter is a target of their investigation. Tom Doody, side note, this is the first I've read this. It seems self-evident, but I don't think it's confirmed officially. So here it is. Prosecutors have said that this is only the beginning of the case, and law enforcement sources have confirmed that Mr. Blazer is the target of the investigation. Misread. I thought they were saying Blatter is officially being investigated. The prosecutors have come short of that. However, Mr. Richmond said the government could get cooperation from other defendants and substitute the new contractors for ill witness to corroborate replace his testimony. If Mr. Blazer made any undercover report, those can be used whether or not he is present, Mr. Richmond said. The hearing transcript filed Wednesday contained a few biographical details about Mr. Blazer. He attended graduate school in New York. His middle name is Gordon. He has rectal cancer. Thank you, New York Times. Type 2 diabetes and coronary artery disease. Another Tom Doody side note. This is what I mean about these stars that emerge after a ring of criminals is arrested. Some make news and make themselves famous, and others sort of fade away, like pleading guilty and going right to jail. And then it looks like this guy might die. So his testimony may continue to be important while his physical presence is something of the past. The transcript also shows that Judge Doody seemed to have a stereotypical American level of interest in safety as he stumbles over the name of the governing body, saying at one point, I don't know how you pronounce it, FIFA. I don't know how you pronounce it, FIFA. That is the end of the first New York Times article. Again, the subject is Jack Warner, and the title was, the subject was Chuck Blazer, and ex-official Chuck Blazer admitted accepting bribes, World Cup votes, and the occasion of this news report is the evidence that he was part of collecting has been released to the public, and that has been in very recent days. This week. Today is Friday, so like maybe Wednesday. Moving on. Now we go to star number 2. Again, the criminals, when they get arrested together, some of them vanish and others become stars, and Jack Warner is making himself a star. Not only were his sons corroborating, and it seems he didn't know it, he has also gone on TV to tell everyone that he is innocent, and he's also promised an avalanche of secrets. So, President Putin, how much more evidence do you want that this is substantial? Now you got someone who has been arrested, he's out on bail, and he has gone on TV saying there is an avalanche of secrets. So at a minimum, these people are starting to point at one another. Jack Warner is the first to do this that I know of. Jack Warner, the former FIFA vice president, who was among 14 people indicted in the United States grand jury as part of an inquiry into corruption in world soccer, says he knows why the organization president, Sepp Blatter, announced plans to step down. Tom Doody side note, that Sepp Blatter step down is very recent news, like maybe Monday. Blatter knows why he fell. And if anyone else knows, I do, Mr. Warner said at his home country of Trinidad and Tobago on Wednesday. referring to Mr. Blatter's decision this week to resign after 17 years at the helm of FIFA's sub-governing body. Mr. Warner, who said he feared for his life, also said he had evidence linking FIFA to his country's 2010 elections. Tom Doody side note, he is claiming that FIFA is manipulating political elections for the leadership of Trinidad and Tobago. So there's no question about it. This is a more significant organization than a lot of governments in the world. And in this case, they're big enough to F with the democratic process or whatever the selection process is for the leadership, political leadership of Trinidad and Tobago. So how much more evidence is there needed to show that this mess at FIFA is bigger than a lot of countries? Mr. Warner's sons, Daryan and Darrell, are also cooperating with the authorities, having secretly pleaded guilty in 2013 after they tried to deposit more than $600,000 in nearly 24 United States bank accounts in an attempt to avoid detection. They broke up $600,000 into nearly 24 deposits, trying to stay under the radar, and they weren't. During a rambling and sometimes incoherent 7-minute television speech called Gloves Are Off, this is their dad now, this is Mr. Warner, Jack Warner. Mr. Warner invokes Gandhi and sought to cast himself as a victim. In his speech, he paid political advertisement. He said he had documents, including copies of checks linking Mr. Blatter and other senior FIFA officials to an effort to manipulate 2010 elections in Trinidad and Tobago. He said he had placed his files in respected hands and added, "I will no longer keep secrets now who seek to actively destroy the country which I love." This man, I've watched this. Tom Doody, side note, I've watched this speech, and he is very happy with himself also. So he loves his country and he loves himself. He loves himself first, is what I would see as his priority. Mr. Warner's television address came just 4 days after he vigorously defended himself in an online video, saying the charges against him were conspiracy, cooked up by the United States. Okay, I think the world knows, Mr. Warner, that is bullshit. These have not been cooked up by the United States. If they were, you would not have an avalanche of secrets, as you claim. That's the end of the pause. Tom Doody editorial while I flip the pages. 6 and 7. All has stemmed from the failed U.S. bid to host a World Cup, he said of an indictment then. So that was right about the timing of the dishonorable, honorable President Putin, who was claiming the same. U.S. got snubbed on the World Cup, so they decided to find some criminals to blame. And it's very clear that's what the claims are false. In the video posted on Sunday on his personal website, Facebook page, and YouTube channel, he cited an article from The Onion that he had said backed up his claims, apparently unaware that it was satire. He also told his reporters that he was innocent of charges against him. At the end of the day, all of the allegations against me shall be proven unfounded. I'm getting a phone call. Hola, Tom Doody. Oh, hey, Michael, I'm glad to hear from you. Okay. 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 Credit one isn't. Capital One, yes. It doesn't matter. If you have it written down, I'll clarify from him. But so you're going to send this to me, and I'm going to call him? And Michael, when do I call him? Okay, great. Send it to me. I'm within like 5 minutes of finishing something that I was doing, so I'm going to call. It'll take me a few minutes to read your email, and I will call him. I'll call him in about 30 minutes, and I'll tell you when I'll reply. I'll tell you when I've done it and what happened. Oh, fantastic! That helps. That's a lot of help. I'll look forward to it, Michael. Ciao, ciao, ciao. Yeah, ciao. All right, so someone is working on Friday, and that is my friend Michael in India. So this middle-aged American is going to be working again very soon when I finish this last page. I apologize to the people of Trinidad and Tobago for not disclosing my knowledge of these matters before, Mr. Warner said, saying that he was like a lone, isolated soldier, paraphrasing Gandhi, and said that throughout history, tyrants had fallen in the end. Mr. Warner also felt threatened, saying, I reasonably and surely feel for my life. Yet, shortly after the speech was broadcast, he appeared in a rally for the Independent Liberal Party and seemed resolute. Mr. Warner faces a raft of charges, including racketeering, bribery, fraud, money laundering, but denies the accusations. In 2004, the FIFA Executive Committee deciding where to hold the 2010 World Cup, South Africa's government arranged for what amounted to a $10 million bribe to Mr. Warner and others as exchange for their votes. According to the indictment, which was handed up May 20th but announced last week, when FIFA was considering which country would host the 2006 World Cup, Mr. Warner sent a relative to a Paris hotel room to collect a briefcase filled with $10,000 in cash from an official on the committee for South African bid. South Africa has emphatically denied giving any bribes to ensure that it would host the tournament, but news reports on Thursday said the country's organized crime unit had opened a preliminary investigation into the bribery accusations. The Australian police are also investigating corruption accusations in connection with the country's bid for 2022 World Cup in Qatar. Amid allegations that funds were misappropriated, the chairman of the Football Federation Australia, Frank Lowley, published an open letter on Wednesday in which he cited an investigation by CONCACAF that said Mr. Warner had committed fraud and misappropriated the funds. Australian officials in recent days have been expressing deep disappointment at losing the World Cup to Qatar. And some critics of the Qatari bid are hoping that it will lose the tournament, even as officials there insist that their bid was above reproach and that the tournament is not under threat. The sports minister of Australia, State of Victoria, John Aaron, said the country could host the World Cup tomorrow. Elsewhere, the former England soccer captain David Beckham added his voice to those in European soccer who had grown weary of Mr. Blatter. I hope at last we are now moving in the right direction. He was quoted as saying by the BBC, "Some of the things that we know happened were despicable, unacceptable, and awful for the game we love so much." Mr. Beckham, who rose to global stardom playing for Manchester United, was a central supporter of England's unsuccessful bid to support the World Cup in 2018, which was awarded to Russia. That's the end of the editorial. That's the end of the news report. There's a correction that's tagged on, but it's unimportant. So this story already, just anyone like Putin or Warner who chose this, this whole thing is cooked up by the United States, is just not, it's falling apart. That just didn't happen. And I have some NYPD guys here, and I think they're going to come chat with me, so I'm going to click stop. This has been Tom Doody, middle-aged American living in New Jersey near the Lincoln Tunnel. If you were to visit my website, you would type howdy. Those were the two cops. Howdy Doody into Google. You'll find the correct spelling of the famous puppet. You then combine Tom Doody in a Google search for my site. Thank you for listening. Have a good day, good evening, a restful night's sleep. Ciao. I'm going to write a book, How to Get Overlooked by the NYPD. It'll be a very short book. But I've had 30 of those in my subway days that didn't result in being overlooked. But I'm in a place that, by my calculations, makes me easy to ignore by the police, not easy to ignore by some of these people who you see walking by. Have a good day, good evening, a restful night's sleep. Ciao. Have a good weekend. Ciao.